Welcome, dear listeners, to History with Herodotus, where the tapestry of time unfolds before our very ears. Today, we embark on a fascinating journey to explore the captivating tale of the rise and fall of Carthage, a city that once shone like a beacon in the ancient Mediterranean world. As we delve into this epic narrative, you will be transported to a realm of mighty leaders, cunning diplomats, and fearless warriors, where the fate of empires hung in the balance. In the 9th century BCE, the eastern shores of the Mediterranean were ablaze with the fiery spirit of Phoenician colonization. These intrepid seafarers, hailing from the city-states of Tyre and Sidon, had long been masters of the maritime trade, their vessels plying the waves to establish a network of thriving outposts across the known world. One such outpost would eventually become the fabled city of Carthage, founded in 814 BCE by the enigmatic Queen Dido, a Phoenician princess of unparalleled cunning and beauty. According to legend, Dido fled her native Tyre after the brutal murder of her husband King Assurbas and sailed to the shores of North Africa, where she would ultimately establish the foundations of Carthage. As we follow the trajectory of Dido's remarkable journey, we find ourselves in the midst of a vibrant cultural landscape where the influences of Phoenician, Greek, and indigenous African traditions blended in a rich tapestry of art, architecture, and commerce. The early Carthaginians were a pragmatic people, adept at navigating the complex web of alliances and rivalries that characterized the ancient Mediterranean world. Under the guidance of their capable leaders, the Carthaginians rapidly expanded their city's influence, establishing a robust trade network that stretched from the Iberian Peninsula to the distant shores of Sicily. The city's strategic location, nestled in the heart of the Tunisian Gulf, allowed it to control the vital sea lanes that connected the eastern and western basins of the Mediterranean. As the centuries passed, Carthage continued to flourish, its merchants and sailors amassing vast fortunes through their mastery of the maritime trade. The city's ruling elite, known as the Sophetes, wisely invested in the development of a powerful navy, which would eventually become the envy of rival powers across the ancient world. With its impressive fleet and extensive network of trading outposts, Carthage was poised on the threshold of greatness, ready to challenge the dominance of established powers like Greece and Rome. As the 6th century BCE dawned, Carthage's ascendancy continued unabated, its merchants and sailors establishing a stranglehold on the Mediterranean trade. The city's rulers, the Sophetes, wisely invested in the development of a powerful navy, which would eventually become the envy of rival powers across the ancient world. One notable example of Carthage's maritime prowess was the expedition of Hanno the Navigator, who in 480 BCE set sail with a fleet of 60 ships and over 30,000 men bound for the western coast of Africa. This daring voyage, which took several years to complete, marked the beginning of Carthage's expansion into the Atlantic, as Hanno established a series of trading posts and colonies along the African coast. The 5th century BCE saw Carthage's influence expand further as the city's merchants and diplomats forged alliances with the Etruscan cities of Italy and established trade relationships with the Greeks. However, this period also saw the emergence of a new and formidable rival in the form of Rome. The Romans, who had long been wary of Carthage's growing power, began to challenge Carthaginian dominance in the Mediterranean, sparking a series of conflicts that would eventually become known as the Punic Wars. The first of these wars, which lasted from 264 to 241 BCE, saw Carthage pitted against Rome in a struggle for control of the strategic island of Sicily. The war was marked by a series of brutal and bloody battles, including the Battle of Agrigentum, where the Carthaginian general Hanno was defeated by the Roman consul Appius Claudius Caudex. Despite this setback, the Carthaginians continued to fight on, led by the brilliant and charismatic general Hamilcar Barca, who would eventually become one of the most famous figures in Carthage's history. As the war drew to a close, the Carthaginians were forced to surrender Sicily to the Romans and pay a hefty indemnity to boot. However, this defeat only served to galvanize the Carthaginian people, who vowed to rebuild and recover from their losses. Under the leadership of Hamilcar Barca and his son Hannibal, the Carthaginians set about creating a new and powerful army, one that would eventually take the fight to the Romans themselves. The years that followed saw Carthage's power and influence continue to grow, as the city's merchants and diplomats forged new alliances and established trade relationships with the kingdoms of Spain and Gaul. In 218 BCE, Hannibal set off from Spain with a massive army of over 30,000 men, bound for Italy and a showdown with the Romans. The journey was long and arduous, taking him across the Pyrenees and into Gaul, before eventually crossing the Alps into northern Italy. This daring feat, which has become one of the most famous in military history, was accomplished despite treacherous terrain, hostile tribes, and the loss of many men and elephants. As Hannibal descended into the Italian peninsula, he was met with a mixture of awe and terror by the Roman people, who had never seen an army like his before. The Carthaginian general's tactics were unorthodox and innovative, using his famous war elephants to break through the Roman lines and shatter their formations. The Romans, who had long been accustomed to fighting against other Italian cities, were completely unprepared for the likes of Hannibal, and suffered a series of crushing defeats at his hands. The Battle of Cannae, fought in 216 BCE, was one of the most significant of these victories, as Hannibal's army encircled and annihilated a massive Roman force, killing over 50,000 men in a single day. This disaster, which was one of the worst in Roman history, left the city reeling and paved the way for Hannibal's march on Rome itself. However, despite his many victories, Hannibal was ultimately unable to capture the city and was forced to content himself with ravaging the surrounding countryside. As the years passed, the war between Carthage and Rome continued to rage on, with both sides suffering heavy losses. The Carthaginians, who had long been superior at sea, began to lose their naval advantage, as the Romans developed a new type of warship known as the corvus, which allowed them to grapple and board enemy vessels. This innovation, combined with the brilliance of Roman admirals like Duilius, eventually gave the Romans control of the seas and allowed them to launch a series of devastating attacks on Carthage's coastal cities. Despite these setbacks, Hannibal continued to fight on, using his genius and cunning to outmaneuver the Romans at every turn. However, as the war dragged on, it became clear that Carthage was beginning to tire, its resources depleted by years of conflict. The Roman general Scipio Africanus, who had long been studying Hannibal's tactics, eventually developed a plan to defeat him, and in 2002 BCE, the two armies clashed at the Battle of Zama in what is now modern-day Tunisia. The battle was fierce and intense, with both sides suffering heavy losses. However, in the end, it was Scipio who emerged victorious, as Hannibal's army was defeated and forced to retreat. The war was finally over, and Carthage was forced to surrender, paying a massive indemnity to the Romans and ceding control of its territories in Spain and North Africa. As the dust settled on the Battle of Zama, Carthage was forced to come to terms with its defeat, and the once mighty empire began to crumble. The Treaty of Peace, imposed by Rome, stripped Carthage of its territories in Spain and North Africa, and reduced its navy to a mere fraction of its former size. The city itself was left to pick up the pieces, its economy shattered, and its people demoralized. According to Polybius, the great historian of the ancient world, the Carthaginians were so thoroughly humbled that they were forced to accept any terms that the Romans might impose upon them. In the years that followed, Carthage struggled to regain its footing, but it was a shadow of its former self. The city's famous mercantile spirit was still evident, but its merchants and traders were now forced to operate in a world dominated by Rome. The great harbor, once filled with ships from all corners of the Mediterranean, was now a quiet backwater as trade and commerce shifted to Roman-controlled ports. As the centuries passed, Carthage became increasingly assimilated into the Roman Empire, its culture and identity slowly being erased. And yet, despite its downfall, the legacy of Carthage lived on. The city's contributions to the development of the Mediterranean world were immense, from its innovative agricultural practices to its sophisticated system of government. As the Roman statesman Cato the Elder once said, "Carthage may be defeated, but its spirit will never be conquered." Today, the site of Carthage is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, attracting visitors from around the world who come to marvel at the ruins of this ancient civilization. The struggle for dominance, the importance of trade and commerce, the impact of war and conflict. All these themes are just as relevant today as they were in ancient times. That's all for today's History with Herodotus. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, remember that to understand the present, we must first understand the past.